Welcome back to the next Flying Fundamental module. Alright, today's module is on Waveoffs and landing irregularities. As in the rest of all the videos, make sure you have time to watch this module. Make sure you have the crew day as well as that you've reviewed all publications, especially the applicable pages in your FTI. As always, use the pause button if needed to review the content. This module will cover the following topics. First, we'll identify situations where Waveoff may be necessary or is mandated by outside sources. We also define the procedures to execute a Waveoff. And lastly, we will identify hazardous landing errors and irregularities and appropriate corrections to apply during these conditions. During the course of your training, it will be important to recognize situations when a wave-off may be necessary. Here are just a few of the examples that we will go over. If the decision was made to land and the landing occurred off center line, do not aggressively correct back towards the runway center line. Instead, wave off. If the aircraft in the flare is too high, too fast, or in an unsafe attitude for landing, wave off and come back around for another landing. Unlike a standard takeoff procedure, max power may not always be required depending on the situation. We will cover this situation and examples like it further on in this module. Wave-offs are mandatory in the following situations: when externally directed by the runway duty officer, wheels watch, tower, or when given the wave-off lights. When the stick shakers are activated prior to the flare and touchdown inside the 90 or inside the base key during a practice emergency landing pattern. When you roll out onto final and the aircraft in front of you has not landed or cleared the active runway. Anytime you are more than 45 degrees angle of bank is used to get onto final. You will see this example when you have overshooting winds.
ELP traffic always has the right of way.
In the event there is a conflict in the landing pattern with a practice ELP or PELP, in this situation you would again wave off. And as always, in the event something doesn't seem right, execute a wave off is a safe course of action. The reasons for externally directed wave-offs may not be apparent to the pilot. Unless a greater emergency exists, compliance is mandatory. Once the decision to wave off has been made, do not make any further attempts to salvage a bad landing. There will be three scenarios we will discuss today: a wave off at a flare/round out, a wave off/go around prior to the landing phase but below 500 feet AGL, and a wave off/go around above 500 feet AGL. For a flare/round out wave off, PCL goes to max. A T6 has exceptional wave off capability, but be aware if you pull power to idle and then go to max to wave off, it will take a second for the oil to move back into the propeller blades to provide usable thrust. So again, do not delay going to max power if it doesn't feel right. During your power addition, level the wings and center the ball, since the sudden increase in power will have a tendency to pull the nose to the left. One technique is to add an inch of right rudder every few seconds as the engine spools up when executing a wave off, or what we like to say is feed the right rudder to the max perform your climb. Raise the nose to the climbing attitude and accelerate towards 120 knots. With a positive rate of climb established and above 110 knots, raise the flaps. If departing the pattern, make sure to raise the gear before accelerating beyond the aircraft limits. Again, a good cross scan will help prevent this. Adjust your flight path as necessary to avoid conflicting traffic that may be on the runway or taking off in front of your aircraft. Always offset on the pattern side you were operating on, and offset enough to keep the aircraft on the runway inside at all times. With interval, call the crosswind turn to re-enter downwind or depart the pattern. For a wave-off prior to the landing phase but below 500 feet AGL, procedures are the same as previously discussed for the round-out/flare, except instead of going PCL max, you're going to go PCL as required. This is due to the altitude from the ground and the ability to have time to adjust power as required to stop your descent. Wave-offs above 500 feet AGL, similar to when departing the 180 and recognizing a conflict, proceed the same way as previous wave-offs with these changes. Again, PCL as required, but continue your ascent down to 500 feet AGL. PCL as required is due to the altitude from the ground and the ability to have time to adjust power as required to stop descent. Descending to 500 feet AGL is to comply with the local directives. Landing errors. Landing errors are any deviation from a normal landing which can be caused from improper corrections while in the landing phase. Landing errors can allow for a dangerous situation to develop quickly. The pilot must recognize when one of these situations exists and take swift and corrective action before an even more dangerous situation develops. Case in point, they should wave off. During the landing transition, the aircraft's airspeed is slightly above stall speed, so any abrupt control changes in pitch control could result in the following landing irregularities. The 8 landing irregularities are: landing in a drift or crab, wing rising after touchdown, high flare, floating, late or rapid flare, porpoising, ballooning, and bouncing. We will discuss each landing irregularity in detail. Landing in a drift or crab is caused by the pilot's failure to apply sufficient wing-low crosswind corrections. Landing in a crab may place excessive load on the landing gear. Wave off if unable to apply proper crosswind controls before touchdown, as well as during rollout. Wing rising after touchdown, which is a lift differential on the upwind wing which causes a rolling moment. Allowing the upwind wing to rise may cause the downward wing to strike the ground. Recover by moving the control stick toward the wind, keeping the wings level. This spoils the lift on the upwind side while increasing lift on the downward side. Maintain directional control with rudder until a safe taxi speed. Or wave off. High flare. A high flare is caused by performing a flare too early or with an excessive pitch attitude. The pilot overcorrecting with an abrupt pitch down attitude may result in a premature touchdown of the nose gear. Recover by releasing a small amount of backstick pressure to increase aircraft descent rate. Once excessive altitude is lost, reestablish the normal flare attitude. This may result in you landing farther down the runway, but you'll land safely. A late or abrupt flare is a result of higher than expected descent rate or misjudged altitude. This is commonly referred to as snapping the stick. The misjudgment of altitude causes the pilot to abruptly flare to prevent a premature or firm touchdown. This abrupt flare can potentially lead to an accelerated stall due to the aircraft's slow airspeed and current configuration. To recover, hold the normal landing attitude and add power. Using power increases thrust and lift, decreasing the aircraft's angle of attack, enabling a recovery or wave off. Porpoising is caused by an incorrect or flat landing attitude and airspeed. This most commonly happens when the nose gear contacts the runway prior to the main landing gear. Porpoising causes the aircraft to oscillate between the nose gear and the main gear. Repeated impacts will cause structural damage to both landing gears and airframe. Recover by positioning and holding the controls to a takeoff attitude. Smoothly move PCL to max and wave off. Cycling the controls to combat the porpoising effect will only increase further aircraft oscillations. Floating. Floating is caused by a late power reduction, excessive airspeed, approaching the landing threshold, or improper flap setting for the given condition or situation. This may result in the aircraft landing long, or possibly a balloon or bounce. Recover by slightly increasing the pitch attitude to reduce airspeed toward the landing. Avoid prolonged floating, especially when operating in crosswind scenarios or operating on short runways. Ballooning is caused by the pilot rapidly raising the nose toward the landing attitude with excessive airspeed. This results in an altitude gain if airspeed is high and excessive pitch rate is used. Recover by holding the landing attitude, allowing the aircraft to settle onto the runway. Wave off from a pronounced balloon. Do not attempt to salvage the landing. A bounce. A bounce is a firm or hard touchdown which causes the aircraft to bounce above the runway. The height of the bounce depends on the force at which the aircraft strikes the runway. If a slight bounce is encountered, continue with landing. With a severe bounce, do not attempt to land. Wave off. You will hear your instructor say this a lot. Wave offs are free. If it doesn't feel right, wave off, and do not accept unsafe landings. Here's an example of an unsafe landing that should have been waved off multiple times. Near the end of the video, you can actually see that the landing gear collapses, all because the pilot in command wanted to land the aircraft, causing unnecessary damage. Whatever the case may be for a landing irregularity or a situation you may find yourself in, if you recognize a potential dangerous situation develop, never try to salvage a bad landing. Execute a timely wave off is much easier than explaining a damaged aircraft. So again, do not hesitate, wave off. Alright, in summary, we have identified situations where a wave off is either necessary or mandatory. We have also discussed the 6 procedures related to executing a wave off. And lastly, we've identified hazardous landing irregularities and the decisive action required to recover the aircraft before a more dangerous situation develops. Alright, this concludes the wave off and landing irregularities module. I encourage you to rewatch this module to help you better understand the concepts, review the study material, and understand that you always have the option to seek out an instructor as needed to clarify any amplifying information. Other than that, let's move on to the next module.